Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Tuesday, April 7th, 2026, and today we're going to talk a bit about the wild and shared world of agriculture in the Middle Ages. We will take a crop planting question and one about seeding long season crops directly, plus shovels. I don't know why I said it that way. I don't know how else I would say it though. So yeah, touche. So let's do it. All right, everyone, welcome to Tilth Tuesday, your weekly reminder that you can get living soil compost and potting mixes from the Bonafide Nerds at Tilth Soil. Check out Nathan on the Composter Podcast, Season 4, Episode 3, or head to tilthsoil.com to learn more. I hope your weeks are off and running in the right direction. It's been a little colder here, which is fine. It's all fine. It's spring, hot for part of the week, cold for another part, wind, rain, snow, anything goes. I've got a little harvesting to do this morning for our first official week of harvesting, exclusively lettuce this week to kick things off, but we should have a nice flush of carrots and beets and such coming up real soon. How are things looking on your farms or in your gardens? Let us know by sending along a 20-second farm video clip to farmermike@no-tillgrowers.com. You can upload those to Drive or Dropbox or whatever, and then share that with Mike. Very cool yesterday seeing the daikon after the winter in that user-submitted video from Lee. So yeah, very cool stuff. So yeah, don't hesitate to show us what you all are up to. A quick reminder that I will be going live tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern per usual, so make sure to bring your questions. Also, congratulations to Blair Evans, who won the bracket challenge this year, and our runner-up Gustav Jans or Janes? Probably Jans. I'm going to assume that it's not Janes after Gustav, but what do I know? We've been doing that, little bracket challenge for 8 years or something now. One of my favorite events every year because, I'm always asking people to play these weird sports-related games with me. So I appreciate when you all buy in. Thanks to everyone who came and played with me. Congrats to Michigan or whatever. All right, so I've been reading this book called The Green Ages, Medieval Innovations in Sustainability by Annette Kinnell, and I would be pretending if I said it was the most engagingly written book, I got to be honest, which is fine, typical nerdy history book, but it's definitely fascinating, and there are so many different things to talk about within this book, and I probably will over time, but I love that the whole first chunk of this book is essentially about cooperative farming models and the use of the commons in the Middle Ages. Now, I've talked about the commons before, where you essentially have common ground that different people use for different reasons, or maybe the same reasons, but it's not really owned. It's just utilized. And there are some really fairly profound examples of this throughout history, of which we have some solid records in terms of how they worked. Weirdly decent record keeping back in the Middle Ages. A great example is Lake Constance. This is the lake on the border of modern Switzerland, Germany, and Austria. And from 1350 to 1900, so almost 600 years or something, it was managed as a commons, meaning that the lake and the fish / plants / other aquatic life inside of it was a shared resource. Now, you might ask, how was it not overfished in that case if it's just a bunch of people sharing it? If you just give a giant resource, will they not just strip it clean and leave it for dead? Well, no, actually, that's the tragedy of the commons idea, which is a tragedy in itself, because effectively the idea that if people are given free reign over something, that they will just devour it, overlooks one important factor. People can and do value resources when they govern themselves. This idea that they would just devour it, especially in the case of the Lake Constance, did not bear out because the fishermen all had vested interest in preserving its quality, which is to say they had communities to feed. So they organized, they created rules around what to fish and when, including what tools were allowed to be used, what size netting, all that stuff. They created laws that, if broken, resulted in punishments. And of course, it is still protected today, but instead of, by the commoners, it has a commission called the IBKF, which is different in that the fishermen and fisherwomen are no longer self-governing. There are other examples in this book, too, like forests that were managed similar to how indigenous Americans in some areas managed lands, like woods were cleared for fuel, firewood in this case, then burned, then cropped for a year or two, and then grazed, and then returned to forest in a rotation that ensured wood for the future. These were highly regulated practices by nearby villages who had their own vested interest in them, right? They needed them for their villages until some king or higher authority, bumbled in and said, mine, and, took whatever they wanted like an idiot. sounds kind of familiar. People who study cooperatives and commons will tell you that there are many successful examples throughout history, and many follow patterns, which could also be rules that, for instance, they are managed by the people who work them and rely on them, not some distant governing body. They have boundaries, they are monitored, they have conflict resolution systems. The commons were not historically just like, use it however you want. Instead, they were, complex and dynamic systems set up by the people that relied on them. And the reason I think this is relevant is that there's a lot of room for these commons type, these shared land systems in the world we live in now, because going forward, buying farmland by oneself is going to be ridiculously expensive. It's just become a ridiculous notion because we've allowed land to become a commodity. Going in on tracts of land with other farmers, sharing that space and setting out guidelines for use, however, that may be doable. I mean, it's certainly got no lack of precedent, even today, with various farms forming, cooperative operations. And throughout history, that is how land was used. Anyway, let me know what you all think or what that makes you think of. Otherwise, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, you've got questions. I've got things to say about them. We sometimes bravely call those answers. You be the judge. BRB.
I did an experiment to see if seed starting mixes made a difference. Here's an off-brand mix of parsley. Tilth started at the same time. Off-brand of onion. Tilth soil started at the same time. I'd say it's tilth for the win both ways.
Today's episode is brought to you by Grown By. Grow smarter with Grown By, the farmer-owned cooperative. Grown By is the platform for online sales of everything, custom and traditional CSAs, halves of beef, flower bouquets, wholesale to restaurants, and now Grown By supports in-person sales too. Their new app, Grown By Register, you can supercharge your market and farm stand, finally bringing together your online and offline sales and customer data. Grown By is proud to make local food accessible by processing SNAP benefits online and in person right within the app. Grown By helps you put your best food forward. Schedule a demo at coop.grownby.com/no-till. That's coop.grownby.com/no-till. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener or viewer, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. Does this show bring you $2 worth of value a month? $5? You can chip in, and I will get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Once again, we're going to try to get caught up on Patreon questions every day after the Voiceless March. And anyway, our first Patreon question of the day comes to us from Julian from Wilder Roots, who writes, quote, "Hiya, still rocking the show and appreciate the indispensable info," with the, rock and roll emoji. "Seeing as it's crop planting season, I'd like to hear your strategy in regards to crop rotation. I've read and practiced a ton on the subject, but curious as to how to plan for it on both micro and macro levels. For instance, I typically plan to utilize one plot of 8 beds for mostly greens/lettuces and move that plot the following year. But I also have bed vacancies that sometimes get filled with non-lettuce/greens here and there. Is it wise to try and just continue planting that sole plot with succession to the plant family that is currently there, or take advantage of the empty space and do your best to follow with crops that would benefit that system? I'm generally of the mindset to try and keep the plant families and or similar attributes together, adjust fertility as I go, and rotate the plots the following year. Thought it might be a fun topic. I certainly enjoy thinking way too hard about it. Cheers, and thanks, as always, for what you do," end quote. Okay, so thank you. This is a fun question. Now, I've touched on crop planting stuff a bit recently, so I will focus more on that specific question that you asked. Basically, if I have plots designated for certain crops and a bed comes open in those plots, should I roll with that same crop family or something similar? Or just go a different direction? Like, what's my approach there? Well, in general, a new species would be ideal just to avoid disease buildup. But if it's something like lettuce, I'm just frankly not as worried about it as long as I'm not seeing disease issues on the lettuce beforehand. Like you said, I do the same thing. I will fertilize as needed. I may switch from, say, Salanova to a romaine, but I'm not going to sweat it too much if I, put another lettuce in that same spot. Now, if you could also throw in things like sunflowers, or go to a different family altogether and do a round of, chicories or spinach or cilantro or dill, etc., that may not have their own plats already. But I think if simplicity is the goal, that a second round of some other type of lettuce it's not going to hurt you too much. You wouldn't want to do that with heavy feeders, obviously, like brassicas and nightshades, but those are generally in the ground so long that it won't matter. I typically have one tray of lettuce on hand, just, hanging out to fill the gaps because one, we sell a lot of lettuce, and two, heads of lettuce in general only take up like a 1 by 1 foot space or less. So those lettuce heads fit in gaps really well, gaps in longer season crops, gaps in carrots, gaps in general. And I don't sweat the crop rotation too much because photosynthesis is the goal, right? Just keep it planted as much as possible. Unless I had a lettuce disease there, I'm pretty casual about it. So good question though. And go and check out last week's stuff on crop planting if you want a little bit more of that nerdery. I think that was last week. Anyway, our second Patreon question of this catch-up segment is from Austin at Vital Root Farm, who asks, quote, "Hey Jesse, I'm in zone 3A, so season extension and frosts dictate a lot of the way I think about farming. I've done some successful experimenting in my hoop house with direct seeding warm season crops like peppers/tomatoes/eggplants to give them a head start by avoiding the potential cons of transplanting. I got the idea when I saw volunteer tomatoes and peppers germinating in the hoop house long before their domestic cousins on heat mats and under grow lights in my house were scheduled to go in the same ground. I was shocked to see the types of plants I was babying to start inside germinating and growing without help, especially with our cold nights. I've only let my experiments go to the first true leaf stage before terminating and putting in my regular starts. My concern is that these direct sown starts will be stunted by the cold nights and lower soil temps and won't produce well, particularly peppers. What do you think? Handy northern grower strategy, or am I asking for stunted plants that may grow but not produce?" End quote. Okay, thanks. This is a great question. There are a couple things to consider here. Starting them directly in the soil is riskier if you get a cold snap, like you mentioned, but in general, plants started directly where you plan to grow them, so long as you can keep up with the weeds and the pests, will almost always do better, be hardier, be healthier, etc. That's not every time and not in every context because, like you said, you're in a cold climate, but directly seeded crops do not go through the transplant shock and transition of transplants, so there can be some benefit there in terms of their productivity. Now, for mitigating transplant shock, if you decide that you want to stick with the transplants, which I get not wanting to, it's a pain, really just comes down to warming the soil. So something like row cover over the soil before planting will help. Digging the holes the day before and then letting them warm in the sun will also help. Warm water in the planting hole may also help. There are options there for sure. And of course, try to use, pots or blocks that allow for air pruning instead of your usual plastic containers. That will reduce the potential for transplant shock a lot. I'm actually doing a little trial with cucumbers directly seeded in our tunnels this year, and I did that about a week and a half ago, I think, under little cloches, old half pints that I had, these little half pint containers. And so we'll see how well they perform and germinate. So far, they've germinated pretty well. We'll see how they perform. I hope that was helpful anyway. Otherwise, we're going to take a quick break and then talk shovels. It just feels right to say it that way. Anyway, be right back. Today's episode is brought to you by Good Agriculture. Good Agriculture handles farm bookkeeping and tax filing, so there is no scrambling at tax time. They keep your books clean and up to date and show you where your farm's finances stand. If you're behind, they'll get you caught up. They also help farmers find funding and stay ahead of grant deadlines. You run the farm, they help the business. Learn more at goodagriculture.com/info. That's goodagriculture.com/info. Today's episode is brought to you by Rimmel Greenhouses.
Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or your family's harvest, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment that you need for a harvest that you can count on. Rimmel greenhouses are designed for durability and offer the quality that you need to grow productively year-round. Visit rimmelgreenhouses.com to get a quote today.
If I may editorialize for a second, I own a Rimmel tunnel. I love it. We built it ourselves, and I really appreciated the quality of the tunnel as well as the customer service we received in the process. So make sure to check them out.
All right, so there is arguably not a tool I use more and talk about less than the humble shovel. I mean, right? How often am I on here talking about soil blockers or hose versus talking about spade shovels versus digging shovels? While on the farm, I use a shovel almost every day, in some form. So I thought, heck, let's give the shovel its flowers today and talk a little bit about the differences and types you might need based on your goals, because a shovel is not just a shovel. And although I'm wont to say that I could run this farm with a shovel, a rake, a hoe, and a wheelbarrow if I I had to. That doesn't mean any old shovel. So let's talk about shovels for a minute and just what makes sense for what, because this is a daily show and we have the time for these sorts of topics. First, if I was going to just have one, single shovel, which heaven forbid, because I like having three, it would probably be a flat bladed shovel. The blade is the blade, the top of the shovel, the metal part. That's what we call the blade. And there can be many variations in the type and length of handle used. The blade is where we see the biggest utility differences. The flat bladed or square bladed shovel is to me the most versatile. Although not great for digging, especially in compaction, it can technically dig a hole in a pinch. What it excels at, though, is moving material, moving compost, flipping compost, moving soil, stirring soil mix, pretty much whatever you need it to do. However, a close second is what is called the rounded shovel or the round pointed shovel. These are about like they sound. Instead of being perfectly squared off, they are rounded on the blade, which comes to a point on the top, making it ideal for actually digging a hole, but less ideal for picking stuff up for simple surface area reasons. If it's rounded like that, it tends to be a little bit smaller. Now, I will say sometimes your compost is a little chunky. I mean, not yours, compost in general, the royal you. And it's nice to have that little extra slicing action you get from a rounded blade to dig into the compost or soil or wood chips or whatever you're trying to move. But it will just not pick up as much material at one time. Honestly, those are kind of 1A and 1B for me in terms of, shovels, because they both have an equal amount of advantages and disadvantages. The third type of shovel is not as versatile, like you would not be, like filling a wheelbarrow with it lest you have a death wish. And that shovel would be the spade shovel or the digging shovel. Frustratingly for me in this segment, there are different types of blades for this type of shovel too, but this shovel. It's meant for heavier work like digging holes. And the blade is usually 8 or so inches wide, but much longer than your average shovel blade. And tends to be really, really sturdy. The one I have is the Ace of Spades spade shovel that is said to sharpen itself the more that you use it. I don't know about that if that's true, but I've had it for like 15 years now at this point, and it's still very sharp. So an amazing tool, frankly, and I use it for digging carrots out of stubborn soil or digging holes for, tomatoes, and also stubborn soil for digging fence posts, for all the things. It's not a tool I use every day, but every day that I use it, I'm glad that I have it. There are flat blades for that as well, rounded blades, and even blades specifically designed for trenching, tree planting, edging, rooting. For me, unless you are actually doing any of those specific tasks a lot, a rounded blade on a spade shovel is going to take you pretty far. Obviously, things like snow shovels are a thing, and although a really well-made one could come in handy, if you're like mixing your own soil mix or something, to use a super specific example, by and large, I think the flat-bladed shovel is going to be the most helpful across the board. Anyway, what say you all? What is your shovel of choice? Let us know. And otherwise, I think that's it for this Tilth Tuesday. Don't forget, No Till Growers is a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor this show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. And while you're there, thank her for all the work that she does for the show. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and also my wife Hannah for absolutely everything in the world. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soil Handbook, at notillgrowers.com to support this work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or you sign up in the month of April, you get a shout on the show. So big shout outs today to either Joseph Grimes or Joseph Grimes or Joseph Grimes. First name's throwing me a little bit, but I like that. I like it when it's a good challenge. All right, so this week, our main character, Tom, with an H, has discovered the dream world, a dimension linked with ours that is infinite in size, or so Tom believes, ever growing, ever mingling. At least that's, Tom's theory. You see, the thing about this dimension is that Tom discovered it by accident, where he's in a remote lab deep in the desert and began picking up sound waves from underneath this large, sort of unassuming rock mountain thing. But not just sound, like words, like talking, whole world. And he listens more and more, and the more he listens and hears all these voices and sounds, he realizes that some of these could not possibly be real. They're animals. They sound like stories. Some of them are horror. Some of them are random. A lot of them are just like somebody standing in front of a classroom without their clothes on, which is super weird. And other people that just like forgot to do this big project they had. But anyway, it just all clicks. This is not television, he realizes. This is people's dreams, but proof couldn't just be in the recording. For Tom, he had to go and see if he could see it, and just know if there were other explanations, like maybe it is somebody's just I don't know, radio going or whatever. Somebody just creating stories. He didn't know. So he finds a cave on the rock mountain just big enough for one person of his size to squeeze through conveniently, and he goes in. But that is for tomorrow on Lucid Dreaming, but for real. It's not a snappy title, but it's something. Thanks for watching and or listening. We will see you then. Bye.
Used to be so